Hi, I'm Callie and welcome to my kitchen. Tonight, I have an experimental pork butt that I've done a dry rub on and smoked inside in the oven. And I started that early this morning. Tonight with dinner calls for my fancy mac and cheese. This is my smoked Gouda mac and cheese. It's going to be a classic French style recipe with the roux and the bechamel, but don't worry because I'm going to show you exactly how to do that and what to look for. We're going to start out by heavily salting our pasta water and a pound of elbows. You can really use a pound of whatever pasta you prefer, but I find that the pound makes the best ratios. This pasta cooks al dente in 8 minutes, so I'm going to set a timer so I know when that's going to be done. While my pasta's going, I'm going to go ahead and get the rest of my ingredients prepped. So it's been right at 8 minutes. I'm just going to drain the pasta. That is hot. Setting the same pot aside for my bechamel. I'm not going to rinse it because I want the starchy water on the pasta. It's going to help our sauce stick. And I'm just going to dump it into a pan I have ready. I really just don't want it to sit and steam up and cook more and get mushy. It's okay if it cools a little for what we're doing, but it's not okay if it gets mushy. So we're going to try this here to see if you can see it better because I want to show you exactly what I'm doing with this roux. I feel like some people hear roux and they think it's way too complicated when it's really something very simple. It's very important to have all your ingredients for this ready before you start doing it because once you start, you need to stir it constantly. You can't walk away and do anything else. And this is when it's going to move very quickly because we're doing a light roux for this bechamel. I'm heating my pan up. I've got 16 ounces or 1 pound of extra sharp cheddar cheese and 8 ounces of smoked Gouda. Smoked Gouda has a pretty strong flavor, which I like, but for me, it would be pretty overpowering to use 1.5 pounds or 2 pounds of smoked Gouda, of just Gouda and a cheese. And Gouda is a little more expensive than the cheddar, so I find that they mix well and they balance each other really well. In classic French cooking, roux is 2 parts of fat and 3 parts of flour. So we're going to add 2 tablespoons of butter. This is plain unsalted butter. That's all I use. And 3 tablespoons of flour. I'm going to turn this down just a little. You're really just cooking this until it's mixed. You're not really cooking it. You're not going to cook the raw flour flavor out at this point. You're only browning it more the longer you cook it. And we're going to add to this 1 teaspoon of onion powder, 1 teaspoon of garlic powder, and a 1/2 teaspoon of paprika. And that'll really dry it out, but that's okay. So really what you want to do here with this white roux is to make sure we're also going to add a little bit of salt at this stage. Because if we add it now, we won't have to add as much later, or probably not any later. And I'm only going to do 1/4 teaspoon. So all you're really doing at this stage, you're not cooking it, you're just making sure that the flour and the butter are completely mixed and there's no clumps of flour. And adding cold milk to make our bechamel. It's very important to have hot roux and cold milk, or warm milk and cold roux, but in this case, we're doing hot roux and cold milk. And I'm actually going to do 3 cups of milk. I'm making sure that I'm showing you because this is a part that always scared me when I was making a roux or a bechamel or a velouté or anything in school, because it will get clumpy, and that's okay. You've added cold milk to something hot, to hot flour, and it will clump. And it always scared me, and then it always turned out fine in the end, but I would have completely freaked out for a good 6 or 7 minutes thinking I had ruined it. But we're just going to get this back to where it's simmering again. It just started simmering, so I'm going to turn this down a little because I don't want a rolling boil like that. This is the part where we cook the raw flour taste out. I see a lot of confusion about that. It's not going to cook out in the roux stage. This is where it's going to cook out. And in my experience, it takes about 6 minutes once it starts boiling or simmering to cook the raw flour taste out. I like to set a timer to remind myself, and then I tend to taste it then to see if the raw flour taste is out. But in the meantime, you cannot stop stirring this. You can't. Anytime you're cooking with milk, you don't stop stirring, but also when you're cooking with a roux. The roux is the flour and the fat, or butter in this case, and to make it a bechamel is when you're adding milk or cream. When you make a bechamel, you can actually say, I'm making a cheddar bechamel or a smoked Gouda bechamel, and it sounds a lot fancier than cheese sauce. That's a trick they use at some of the restaurants. But this is all it is the base for the macaroni and cheese. Before it starts simmering, it might be a little lumpy up to this point. You want to make sure that you got all of the lumps out and the flour was completely wet with the butter before this part. But then at this part, it will clump up. It tends to clump up, and it will look like you've ruined it. But as it warms up, as the milk warms up, it will tend to mix better into the sauce or into your bechamel sauce. And that is the point where you're actually thickening it up some. You're cooking the flour and thickening up the sauce. Now, I want to make sure you see the difference there. It is on my spoon a little from the sides of the pan, but I don't have big clumps of flour anywhere. Just a thickened sauce on the side. And if you can see this, I think this is actually a little too thick, and I think my recipe was a little off, so I'm going to add another cup of milk. So I have 4 cups of milk altogether. And then once that's simmering again, my time starts back up. I don't normally go by a recipe. I kind of go by experience and how it looked. In this case, the 3 cups of milk I originally started with was not enough. I felt like it needed more sauce and to be not as thick. It was a lot thicker than I wanted to begin with, starting out. So I added another cup of milk. So I have 4 cups of milk now, and I think that will give me plenty of sauce at the right consistency, or the consistency that I'm looking for. It didn't mess anything up. It did thin it out, but it didn't mess anything up to add it in, and I'm just going to continue to get it back to a simmer and cook it for another few minutes to cook out that flour taste. It's been right at 6 minutes that it's been simmering. I did turn it down so it doesn't boil too hard. This is the point that I'm going to taste it and see if it has any raw flour taste. Remember, we already have our seasonings in it, but we just don't have our cheese yet. Not good. I am going to put, it's nowhere near salty enough, but I'm about to add cheese, so I'm not going to put any salt yet. But at this point, I'm going to leave it low. Grab a whisk, and I'm going to start putting handfuls of this cheese in. And try not to get it all over the burner. Remember to scrape the sides and the edges of the pot so it doesn't stick anywhere. I'm going to set some aside because I like a topping. Sometimes I'll shred more and I'll put a whole pound in, and I'll shred more to put on top. Sometimes there's more cheese in the refrigerator than there is today. So today I'm just going to set aside a couple ounces of cheese. And I'm going to add my Gouda. And then I'm also leaving a couple ounces of, well, I'm leaving just a little bit of the Gouda set aside for the top too. And then you're just going to keep mixing this constantly, whisking this until it's mixed in. If you can see now, it's pretty chunky still. And that's not what we want. I've just been stirring constantly, and it looks a lot better now. It's not as chunky, but remember, we already cooked out the flour lumps. There were no flour lumps to begin with, so that's chunks of cheese or little pockets of cheese, if you will, and we're going to put it in the oven, so that will melt more. I think we're to the point that we can taste it now. I'm going to turn this off. One of the reasons I love a gas burner, because that heat is off and I don't have to worry about it cooking while it's off. And take another clean spoon and taste it at this point to see if it needs anything else. God, that's good. I think it's probably salty enough for you, but it's probably, I could do with more salt. But we're gonna have this with pork, so I'm not gonna salt this anymore. I think that's a good amount. I'm just gonna take this and pour it onto my pasta that's been sitting here ready. I want to get all the goodness. It is technically completely cooked at this point. If you wanted to, you could eat it like this, have it very creamy. But I personally like to have a crispy topping to it. I have some family members who tell me that macaroni shouldn't have crispy or shouldn't be crispy, but I'm cooking it and I like the crispy top because I like the different textures to it. So I'm going to mix this in. This looks like a lot of cheese. If you were going to eat it at this point, I'd probably do the 3 cups that I originally started with and not add the extra cup, but it tends to, the pasta tends to absorb some of the sauce some when you put it in the oven, and I am going to put it in the oven because I want a crispy top. I think the macaroni noodles are actually sucking some of the sauce into the noodles, so I'm going to stir for another minute. This is the point that when I'm making my lobster mac and cheese, that I add that raw lobster tail for a special occasion. The special occasion being the lobster tails were on sale. Now that that's mixed in better, I think a lot of that cheese is inside of those noodles, which will make that really taste cheesier or feel cheesier than having it all on top. I like to use the same thing I've used in the macaroni and cheese, slightly stronger, because in the macaroni and cheese there's a teaspoon of garlic, a teaspoon of onion, a quarter teaspoon of paprika, and a little sprinkle of white pepper, and a little bit of salt. In the topping, I'm going to use half a teaspoon, a quarter teaspoon, and a little sprinkle. And then a little bit of both of the cheeses. There's not really an exact amount. It's really how much do you want on the top of it. On this, I think I have a couple ounces and about an ounce. And I'm taking a cup of, well, we'll do the rest of the panko. I'm using panko because it's crispier, and I want that crispy crust, or that crispy crunchy on top. And with regular breadcrumbs, it needs to cook longer to get that crisp, or you need more butter. And with panko, the amount of cheese that I'm using and the panko will crisp on its own instead of needing the extra fat. I'll measure it to give you better, so I can tell you exactly what I'm using. So, right at a cup, my first measurement, wasn't it? Right at a cup of panko, for the rest of what I have. Lovely coincidence. And then I'm just going to add the seasoning. And to this, I am going to add a little more salt because what's crispy crust without being a little salty? I'm just going to sprinkle it on top. And make a mess. And then into our 350-degree preheated oven just to get that cheese on top melted. It's probably going to be about 10 minutes, but we'll find out. And I'm going to get all this cleaned up. It's been about 15 minutes. This isn't doing how I want it to do. And for me, the point of cooking is to get it how I want it. So I've shredded another couple ounces of cheese, and I'm just going to add this to the top, because if you can see this, it didn't get as mixed with the cheese as I would have liked, and we found a little extra cheese. So I'm going to add this on top and cook it another few minutes, because I really want that cheesy, crispy, crunchy topping on there. I think the panko really just settled in, or the cheese really settled and the panko wound up on top of the cheese is what it was. But I think that looks good, and I'm going to cook it another few minutes to see how it looks. It's been another 5 minutes, and I think this is done. I actually don't want to get it too done because I don't want to dry up that cheese sauce. I should probably let it cool for a few minutes, but I think we have a hungry crowd. And if you can see that. All right, so he says he doesn't eat macaroni like that, so let's see.
At all.
It's hot, be careful.
Alright. First, I'll try mac and cheese for real.
I broke my rule. I didn't try it. I gave it to somebody without trying it first.
Wow. That's amazing.
That's good? Think you could eat that macaroni and cheese? Alright, now you got some barbecue sauce. So the whole idea is the Gouda mac and cheese with the barbecue sauce, which we have a couple different barbecue sauces, but I think this one will go pretty well with the several different kinds that we have. And to have that mac and cheese with the barbecue sauce, with the barbecue. There was some coleslaw for our vegetable, but the teenagers ate it.
All of them go together. This is good.
Alright. I'll let you keep that plate.
Yes, ma'am.
That's my smoked Gouda mac and cheese. And my experimental pork butt, which we might have a video for that later, depending on how well that goes. But if you like this video, give us a thumbs up. Don't forget to hit that subscribe, and we hope to have more videos out soon. In the meantime, y'all have a good one. Y'all want to shut the seat?
Hey, this is good. Like, I truthfully don't eat mac and cheese for real. This is good. Oh,